Hello you, it's me. Today we're going to talk about A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, which is the first book in a duology. I'll be going through plot, review, things I liked will be mixed into that. Things I wasn't too keen on, it'll all be marked on the time bar, feel free to click around as always. I'll try and be as spoiler-free as I can. Mahit is a member of a space station-dwelling people who live in deep space and, unbeknownst to the rest of the galaxy, receive implants called imagos, containing the memories and personalities of the previous person in their position, to ease the process of stepping into somebody else's shoes. She is sent to the core world of the great Teixcalaan Empire, which is slowly engulfing entire systems, but up to this point, something that her people have managed to remain independent of. She's sent as a replacement to investigate the death of her predecessor under very mysterious circumstances, the man of whom she has a replica inside her head, fighting to slot herself into the court, into the twisted relations of Teixcalaan. She must find out what's going on. She must solve the mystery of her predecessor's death, uncover what's happening in the high ranks close to the throne, and save her culture and people from being annexed by the relentless tide of imperialism. This story opens with the dedication. This book is dedicated to anyone who has ever fallen in love with a culture that was devouring their own. And that pretty much sums up the entire plot of the story. This is a novel about imperialism, about cultural loss, told from the point of view of somebody whose job it is to both adapt to a culture and to hold on to hers. These two cultures, Teixcalaan and Ulsul, are painted very differently in this book, and the main difference, I think, is the things they hold valuable. In Ulsul culture, it's one of thriftiness, of reclamation, of preservation of knowledge and memory, whereas in Teixcalaan culture, there are themes of excess, disposability, wastefulness, fashion in court, things that are fleeting and short-lived. Both cultures have different ways of connecting to the past. Ulsul explores it through people and their actions, who have been before, and Teixcalaan connects to the past more through art and media and created things. And there's this big element in this book of sad, slow inevitability. The cultural encroachment is something that we'd be more familiar with now, rather than things that have happened in human history. This is a war of attractiveness, of seductiveness. The expansion of the empire seems to be much less through military might, and mainly a campaign of influence that catches people in its spider's web. And people are born into this society that does have far-reaching influence. They're raised with a certain set of values, be they moral, aesthetic, behavioural, and this leads to the mindset that anybody with different moral values has less value themselves. The word for home planet is the same as the word for empire, is the same as the word for citizens, is the same as the word for universe. So there's this idea that you don't actually exist as people until you are brought into the Teixcalaan mould and start conforming. And because people are raised inside this culture, it's very easy to see why they don't see that they're doing anything wrong. Most books with a giant empire culture, that is the bad thing, often have the bad culture, the Christianity analog culture, or the white analog culture. I think it's interesting that Martine has made the choice in this to have an imperial culture that is more based on Central American Aztec themes and Byzantine themes. This is apparent both in the layout and aesthetic choices of the city, the dress of the people, and the language, which is something that this book really excels at. Language is such a huge theme in this book. And it's one of the elements that I think is going to be quite divisive among readers. One thing that Mahit has to come to grips with when she first arrives at court is that everything is multi-layered. The way you dress has meaning. The way you gesture with your hands has meaning. What you choose to call yourself has meaning. One thing that's held in super high regard is poetry, and it can be so societally shaking that it's something that instigates rebellion, demonstration, war. Everything you say has multiple meanings that are contextual, double-edged, and I think the way the dialogue was written to reflect this was very impressive. It also means the author was able to create jokes and banter that only exist in Teixcalaan language, and then was able to explain those without having them lose any of the impact or any of the funny. It's very clear just from this that this is such a meticulously planned book and the author put a hell of a lot of work into it. The naming convention in this book is something that initially is a bit long-winded, but that you do get used to very quickly. People in Teixcalaan culture choose themselves a noun name and couple it with a number, whether that noun be silicon, rose, helicopter, anything, all of which have a different meaning, and coupled with a number, have an entirely different meaning. You can infer a lot about the people in this book by the things they choose to call themselves. Your name is the facade you wish to present to the people around you, not necessarily a picture of who you are as a person, but that facade is something that can be very telling. The name system is something that is very close to one that exists in Nahuatl, an ancient language that was spoken in pre-Columbian Central America and is still spoken by a lot of people today, mostly in central Mexico. And they have names that are nouns paired with date-based numbers, which is very interesting. The other element of the book, which I thought was brilliant, were the imagos, things that contain the memory and the personality of people that come before you and are absolutely a metaphor for racial and cultural heritage, which another culture wants to co-opt or appropriate for different, potentially disrespectful, and potentially nefarious means. I also like when a sci-fi book or a fantasy book is non-transferable. It's something I give a lot of points for. There are a lot of stories which you read in sci-fi or fantasy that could work against any backdrop with any people. But the existence of the imagos and how integral they are to the story is something that firmly roots this in sci-fi. It was unclear to me while I was reading this, though, whether any of the cast was non-human. It describes people from different places looking physically very, very different. It says that some people are weirdly tall, some people have very wide mouths with sharp teeth. I'm not sure whether those things are all sort of minor racial difference analogues, or whether it's hinting that humans have been separated planetarily for such a long time that they have started to evolve into different human subspecies. It does say that there are some non-human aliens. It describes the meeting of a general or a leader with the leader of an alien race representative. And then later, in an encounter, Mahit does a bow from this encounter that is designed more for quadrupeds, she says. So they are out there, but were they in court? Was the author being deliberately vague with physical descriptions to make us focus less on that and more on judging people by their wordplay, by the things they do and things they say? I think aside from the very obvious, unsubtle, in-your-face messages about imperialism, co-opting, cultural corrosion, one thing this book does make you realize is that looked at from outside, every single culture, even yours, is just bonkers. Stuff I wasn't too keen on. While there are a lot of good, interesting things in this book, there were some things I got a bit hung up on and didn't very much like. There will be some spoilers in this bit, so turn back now if you don't want that. Firstly, I thought that with the exception of 12 Azalea, most of the characters were boring, and trying to make us like the characters was done 90% through witty banter and not through what the characters did. Because nobody really did anything until 3/4 of the way through the book. I wanted so much more world building than what we actually got. I see a lot of people say about this book that it is masterful world building, and yes, it is, but the focus is on one tiny part of the universe and totally on Teixcalaan culture. There were things referred to so briefly as things that happened in history, and I wanted so badly to get a chance to enjoy that secondary world building, which I think is something that's really important in making a book feel big scale. And for a story that is centered so much around Mahit's culture potentially disappearing, it did very little to make the reader want to preserve that culture because it didn't talk about it at all, aside from the existence of imagos. This seems at first glance like a huge empire story with a massive scope, but in reality I think this is a very small-scale, insular story. Most of the story takes place at a court, ball, or in 12 Azalea's apartment. That's pretty much it. We get these brief, tantalizing 1 or 2 page descriptions of things happening on Ulsal Station, but we never really get to see the Empire from the outside, which is something I would have thought had been important. If we had switched point of view between Mahit, somebody on Ulsal Station, and then somebody on the front lines of the Empire's physical expansion, so we see the consequences of what they're doing firsthand, I think this book could have been something incredible. I also think that with Mahit having been sent there to investigate a death, if this book had just even slightly leaned a little bit more into the noir detective side of things, I would have really enjoyed that too. Speaking of mysteries and things going on, I do kind of feel like Mahit barely did anything in this story and didn't really solve any of the things that were put to her. Things were slowly revealed to her, revealed to the reader, and it kind of felt to me like she was just along for the ride. She was just there seeing it happen. And I think the book was much more about her personal journey than anything actually going on in the Empire until the very, very end. I think the plot is where this book falls down, and I'm left wondering whether Mahit is integral to the story at all. Would all of these things have happened regardless of whether she rocked up or not? We'll never know, but I think maybe. I've also seen this marketed as a space opera, which I don't think it really is, because there's so little variety in setting, so little in the way of other cultural description. We see one, up close, in your face, all the time. For the whole book, this is a book that is going to appeal to fans of historical fiction, of political fiction, of sort of palace intrigue fiction. This is an incredibly well-researched, well-constructed book, but I don't think it's space opera, and I wish I had had different expectations going in. There was a lot I liked. There really was a lot I liked in here about this book, but there were a lot of things that I thought were lacking, sadly. So I'm going to give this book 3 stars. So thanks very much for watching this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more reviews coming thick and quick. I read pretty fast. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Goodreads, link down below. And if you like sci-fi as much as I do, don't forget to join our Interstellar Book Club Discord, which I'll also link in the description. And I'll see you soon for the next one. Bye.